There are those right now that are questioning whether you can withstand the big man.
I don't care about those people, man. I don't care about those people that aren't stark-raving Hulkamaniacs. I could care less what they think. I'm fighting for life, brother. I'm fighting for all those people that have remolded their lives, man. Modeled after Hulkamania. Get their priorities in order, man. Walk around with a lot of pride. As far as those people that are on Andre the Giant's side, I wish they'd come on down, too. I'd like to slap them around just for a warm-up. But I've already gone through my transformation, man. I'm ready for Pontiac, Michigan. I'm not the Hulk anymore. I'm the Hulkster, man. Look into my eyes, man. I'm on that mountaintop, and I'm waiting for you, Andre. And I'm guarding that mountain. And the Hulkster that's guarding has got a 32-inch neck, a 64-inch chest, the largest arms in the world. And I'm geared to seek and destroy. Seek and destroy the cancer of Andre the Giant. Seek and destroy the Weasel's empire. And what you gonna do, Andre, in Pontiac, Michigan, when Hulkamania destroys you?
WrestleMagic.
And now for your hosts, Michael Gross and Sean Bush.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another episode of WrestleMagic. Now tonight, I've got my good friend Sean Bush back, who's just come into the studio, and we're talking about really the impact of the death of Hulk Hogan. And I know that's like very hard to say what was the impact of the death. We have to also look at the impact of the life. We're not here to do a whole retrospective on everything he's done in his career, but we are going to talk about highlights, and unfortunately, we're going to talk about lowlights. And I really want to actually start off by saying that, you know, I love our producer, Jimmy Street, for everything he does. And I also want to say that I love my co-host, Sean Bush, because Sean is amazing and he has a great wrestling mind. And so it's great to actually have this banter and go back and forth and talk about what we felt was impactful and not really so impactful and what really outright buried companies. So today, I want to welcome everybody to Sean Bush. Sean?
Hello. I love you too.
It's great to have you on the show.
That was a nice intro. Thank you for that. Very, very nice words.
Well, you know, ever since Rocky took a sabbatical, you've been like a good co-host to me. And I think that because we know each other so well that we can actually do everything in the studio and kind of get out what we feel about things. So I would like to ask you your first impressions growing up about Hulk Hogan.
What aren't there? Good Lord. Well before I even really knew what wrestling was as an art form, I mean, Hogan was there. He's just been in the cultural zeitgeist for my entire life. I was born, what was it? I was born on the 24th of March in 87. So it's like a week before, it was the Tuesday before WrestleMania 3. So that was literally the first biggest like cultural event in my lifetime. You know, I was, 4 to 5 days old, whatever it was at that point. Obviously I don't remember that, but I mean, going back to, movies, I remember even seeing him in one of Three Ninjas movies at some point, which he had hair. He had hair in that movie. Can you believe it?
Spray on.
Yeah.
It was
on, but WrestleMania 3, it's one of those things in life where, you've got great movies that you love or, records that you love, and sort of you can never really go back and listen to or watch those films again for the first time like you did. And WrestleMania 3 against Andre is kind of like that as far as a wrestling fan. I grew up to be a bit more into the sort of technical style of wrestling myself, but from the early days, watching that match, I can still kind of remember, maybe not where I was, but the feeling. I felt the epicness, the bigness of the moment watching that match, 15 years later, whatever it was, or probably more like 10 years later or something like that when I could find it years ago when I was a kid. But it was surreal. It was just one of those matches. It's one of the biggest and probably most important matches in the history of pro wrestling, and likewise Hulk Hogan and Andre, of course. But, we're talking about the Hulkster today, and I don't think anybody can really deny his, legacy, his impact.
I absolutely agree with you on that because, I'm not a Hogan fan. When I grew up, I'm obviously a little bit older than you, and I watched the NWA on Saturday night, so I saw Ric Flair. So I saw wrestling versus sports entertainment, and it was very interesting to see the two pit each other against each other. It was so much fun. But it was crazy at the time also to see Hogan going against these larger than life opponents. And let's list them off. Andre, the walking condominium, King Kong Bundy.
The walking egg.
Yeah, basically, yeah, that was his nickname, though.
How did Bundy ever get pinned? I don't think his shoulders could ever touch the mat.
His whole gimmick was he had to pin somebody for 5 seconds instead of 3. I loved it. Something that I wish they should do with Bronson Reed today. But anyway, I digress because this is about Hogan. So, Big John Studd. It was everybody who was ginormous. And then I remember, I actually,
well, you say that. I hate to butt in, but somebody the other day, this is a couple of days after Hogan passed away, I had listened already to a few different, reactions, but somebody made a point that I hadn't thought about before. You just named these guys and other guys that he fought that were giants, that were huge. He was also huge. He's 6'7", 300, whatever it was, 40 pounds or something, 330.
Ginormous.
For a baby face like he was at the time, I mean, he was... It's rare that it's a baby is that, kind of as, they're to fight from the, underneath to be able to fight from up, off the mat at a villain, at a bad guy.
Which actually you make a really good point because more of today's modern wrestling is scientific. If you know chain wrestling and you have a medium build, you can beat a much larger person. But this wasn't today's wrestling. So Hogan... I just remember he always fought everybody. Kamala. They brought Kamala up from Memphis to fight him.
And, one of my boys.
Oh, I love Kamala. Sugar Bear Harris. Sugar Bear Harris. But getting into what is really important about the legacy of what Hulk Hogan did is the fact that he was one of the first wrestlers at his size, which was a ginormous size at the time, that they said, okay, we could put him against Andre. And then we could put him against Lawler in Memphis. And then we could ship him off to Portland and he can learn some new things from Buddy Rose and a few other people there. And believe it or not, people, Playboy Buddy Rose was pretty amazing if you watched what he could do as far as chain wrestling. So he was a project person and he was discovered in Florida. We both know this. And he was trained by Hiro Matsuda. And the whole thing was, he always said in his interviews that his first day, Hiro Matsuda broke his leg. Then there's other stories like, well, he came back 8 weeks later. You're not coming back 8 weeks later from a broken leg, okay?
Maybe in 1980 or 70, whatever it was, 81 maybe.
What did Chris Rock used to say? Pour the tussin on it. Just pour the tussin on it.
So and I buy that happened. I know Hogan's like famous for his, exaggerations and whatnot. I buy that Matsuda probably did actually break his leg. That doesn't seem far-fetched.
We will get to that. But yeah, so seriously, they said he had a broken leg. Now, historians and analysts say it was just sprained and he could get back on it. Whatever. The point is, he blew up, and he blew up huge. And so he moved from Florida up to Memphis. And then you weren't anybody back then because there was WWF was WWWF back then. And it was way up. It was a territory. It was different. And so, if you worked Lawler, that was like the biggest thing in the world. At that point, you worked Lawler, Fargo, all the people in Memphis because that was the capital of wrestling at that time in the world. Now, do you know anything about his so-called musical history?
I know a bit about his musical history. I know the fact that he is a legitimate, as far as I know, and I'm not a musician myself, but a pretty decent musician. Pretty good bass player for a number of years. For what that's worth, I know bass players get a lot of flack. But yeah, from what I've seen, I think he was. I don't know much about his history, but from what I can tell, gleaning over the years, it seems like he was a pretty competent musician.
Well, obviously in Memphis, that's when he met Jimmy Hart, and that's when Jimmy Hart and the Gentrys actually had a #1 hit. People don't know that. Some people do. Well, yeah. I mean, if you're a wrestling historian, you do. If you're not, you don't. And so there was a little bond there. And then, of course, it was time for the Big Hulk to keep moving around. Now, he went by several different names. Do you have any of those names on you?
Terry Boulder. That's the best one.
It's such a
Terry Boulder, name. And then his little brother, right, was Booty Man.
Dizzy Hogan. Dizzy Hogan.
That's right.
And let's not forget that he was also Sterling Gold. And he would shave his chest hair into a tornado.
Mm-hmm. I've seen those pictures.
Oh, it's so funny. It's like, who would do, and it's so like lopsided.
Well,
It's
I
so
mean, and that's just
lopsided.
the thing. Seeing him with chest hair or something like that, the visual itself. I mean, we're so removed from that time period, me more so. But to see him looking like any other way than he did, traditionally, the red and yellow, and then NWO obviously later. But it's so weird. It's such a strange thing. He used to wear blue, I guess, was it?
Blue
Or white
trunks.
even. I think he wore white trunks. Maybe that was in Rocky.
Oh, Thunderlips. Yeah.
Oh, Thunderlips. Yeah. Another great
So
name. Why didn't they use that? Where was that gimmick?
that should be my new email, like Thunderlips no, because someone probably has that, and we don't want them to get like firebombed. But getting back to the situation of Hogan is that he did a lot of things as far as making the business better because Vince McMahon saw something in him. He was stolen from Vern Gagne, and that's because Vern Gagne had all the big men, and he was taking them one by one. That's Vince McMahon, excuse me. Pronouns, pal. Vince was stealing all the big men that Vern had. And so Vern was left with a lot of anemic, smaller characters. But Hogan was the most impactful because I guess Vince saw him and said, okay, I can do something with him. Now,
All big green dollar signs is what he
oh
saw.
my gosh, he was the only person at that size, that 6'7", 300, that was taking
I
care of
mean,
himself.
yeah, it's just like impressive. I mean, the guy, he must have been just, it must have been incredible seeing the guy in a room for the first time. Just
Oh,
the impressiveness of his figure.
I, I can't fathom, like, if he walked into a room, how big he is. Like, does he duck going through the doorway? And now, what people do not know is that Hogan wrestled as a heel for so many years before he makes his big break in 1984.
Yeah,
Before
I
Vince
mean,
saw the dollar signs on him, he was a heel everywhere. And his number one opponent, Andre the
what do you say,
Giant.
number one? I was going to say, I wasn't sure if you wanted me to go on and answer that, but he
I,
slammed
well,
Andre years before the first time he slammed Andre.
oh,
Several
yeah.
times, I think.
Oh, yeah. And it was because he was strong enough to do it. Even though he was smaller than Andre, they were trying to create a story. And I don't know if Vince McMahon Sr. was writing a story that would later become WrestleMania 3.
You're giving him that Triple H long-term storytelling credit.
That's like a 15-year story run. They wrestled
Sometimes those
everywhere.
things just end up happening. I mean, I will, just for jump off for 1 second, recently seeing Hangman Page win the AEW title back. I couldn't have seen Tony Khan writing that 4 years ago, whatever it was, when he won it Full Gear the first time. But, sometimes wrestling just has a way of winding itself back around, and you got a character that kind of rises back up to the top at the right time, and it sort of completes that arc. Cody Rhodes did something, quite similar, but these things happen. Sometimes it's a happy accident.
That's a great way of putting it. Sometimes if there's a train wreck, you shouldn't look at it, but you can't help but look. And all of a sudden you get hooked at seeing what you're seeing. And that's what Hogan's, I don't want to say his legacy, but what his career was. So I want to talk a little bit more about do you have any favorite Hogan matches?
I mean, the favorite is WrestleMania 3 against Andre. I know that's probably the cheapest answer anybody could give in that category, but I just don't see how it's not. It's so huge as a match, as a moment in, I would say, even somewhat just in a sports sense, like a real sports sense, at least in the United States. But a lot of the rest of my favorites really came sort of later on in his career when he was in WCW. I remember the cage match between him and Flair at Uncensored, I want to say 99, that yours truly attended with some old friends, when we were about 12 years old. That was a good one. Probably amplified by the fact that we were there live in Freedom Hall for it. And then the Rocky match.
Oh, gosh.
Which I don't know if it gets the right amount or not as enough credit. To be honest with you, sometimes it seems one way, sometimes it seems the other. But these, and I was never, same that you said earlier, I was never really that big of a Hogan fan growing up. I just liked other guys around him, and especially when he got to the NWO, I wasn't an NWO guy. I wanted to see Sting and DDP take him down. And sort of similarly with Rocky, I recognized how great he was, but he was never one of my favorite guys that I like to cheer for. But to go back and even we watched this match, live when we were kids on pay-per-view too. But going back now, it's just one of those matches that the crowd is completely into it. These guys are probably, if not top two, top three or four, pro wrestling stars that, definitely the top two that turned into like cultural, more icons. I would still argue
Exactly.
Hogan's got that over Rocky. I know Rocky's massive these days, and maybe it's recency bias for a lot of people, but I still don't think that he's managed to kind of eclipse the shadow that sort of Hogan's kind of big, wide cultural figure cast.
What I think is really interesting is with Vince McMahon's ability in the 80s to always trademark everything. He could never trademark Hulk Hogan because the word Hulk is owned by Marvel Studios. People don't know this. That's why he could always be Hulk Hogan, not be Terry Bollea again or Sterling Golding again, Lord forbid, and not have Dizzy Hogan follow. Oh dear Lord!
We wouldn't have gotten one of my other favorite Hogan moments if
Horace
the Beefcake. If Beefcake didn't show back up in WCW with him, we wouldn't have gotten that beautiful booty moment.
Well, Hogan always had his stooges, okay? And so, folks, everybody who's listening and putting their earballs on this, I want you to realize that we're not trying to down him. We're having a little fun with this because it is a mourning moment for somebody who helped innovate wrestling as we know it.
Yeah, and one of them is Jimmy Hart. You mentioned earlier. I feel bad for a guy like Jimmy Hart who is obviously very close with Hulk. For his career. And ever since past that. Exactly. And put so much time and his own money, his own work ethic. I mean, Jimmy Hart's one of the real good ones out there still. So I do feel obviously for him and his Hogan's family, deserve, a little bit of condolences there as well, even though they're a little bit of a, clown show, let's say, from the old reality TV days. You can't really escape that too much, but they do, deserve condolences.
So I will say a couple matches that I really enjoyed that Hulk Hogan was part of was when he lost the belt to The Undertaker the first time. That was pretty awesome. That was actually
the time that Undertaker dropped him on his head on a chair.
7 inches away. Yeah. So, folks, if you don't know this, if you don't know this, is a huge controversy with it. And there was not necessarily a feud because I'm not going to speak for anybody else who can't be on the show. But The Undertaker has said a lot of things on his podcast about the fact that his head was nowhere near it. And then he claimed, well, you jarred my body. And they put the belt right back on Hogan, which made no sense. And at that point, Undertaker was hot and he was just taking off. And while I'm not a big fan, a traditional fan of like this person gets pushed to the moon, in retrospect, looking at The Undertaker's catalog of matches versus Hogan's, it's, apples and oranges. So
Taker was still kind of always, I don't think McMahon really, I mean, it's amazing and maybe one day we'll talk about Undertaker, hopefully a long time from now, just saying.
Yes.
Hopefully many, many more years before that. Yes. But, he's a guy that McMahon got a whole hell of a lot out of, but I still feel like, man, he could have gotten so much more. He never really had big, long reigns, His reigns were sort of shorter,
Oh, exactly. But, this is Hogan's moment, so...
Yeah, we keep getting off, but that's okay.
I know.
It's all part of the Hogan verse, man.
Exactly, the Hogan verse. He did have his own verse. I mean, they would bring in people 2 times his size that they would find. Like Earthquake, John Tenta was an actual Yokozuna, which is a real Grandmaster champion sumo wrestler. And they said that he might have been as tough as Andre the Giant. But when Andre was gone, they had him facing Hogan, and it was so hokey. And it's nothing against John Tenta. It's just you didn't buy it because you built the character in 5 months. Andre was around for 40 years. It just didn't make sense at the time. And so you couldn't buy into him like that. You couldn't buy into when they put him in a tag team with Brutus Beefcake and they were going against, Rhythm and Blues. You remember that?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Honky Tonk and Greg the Hammer Valentine.
Oh,
it
poor
just didn't
Greg
make
Valentine.
sense. I love Greg.
He did not look good as a brunette. Let's just put it that way.
You remember Gorilla Monsoon used to call him Boxcar Willie?
Yeah,
I loved that.
Oh, I'll tell
And
you what, you bring up Monsoon. One guy that I wish, for many reasons, that he was still around, Bobby Heenan, but I
oh yeah,
can't say I wouldn't love to have heard. Bobby would have had a great one-liner after hearing the Hogan tonight. He would have had something really funny to say.
well, that's the one thing that people never had realized is the fact that Hogan never had a foil. It was always Bobby Heenan finding people to go after him. That was his
Yep.
foil. That was his enemy. It wasn't Andre because they worked to program
And
him over.
you talk about long-term storytelling. You take it right up from WWF, from all the Heenan family guys going after him. Andre, obviously. Uh,
Hmm.
Heenan always did, even when he got to WCW, he would always favor some of the guys that he used to manage, Rick Rude and Kurt Hennig, those
Yep.
guys in WCW. But always kept up the anti-Hogan thing to the point that if you remember Bash at the Beach, the famous turn,
Yeah.
everybody, people still to this day think that like, oh, Heenan screwed up and he gave away the ending of what was going to happen because he's walking down to the ring, Hogan, in his yellow and red, and here comes Hogan, and Heenan goes, but whose side is he on? Which is,
And that,
I mean, Heenan's one of the greatest minds in wrestling, and he
oh
just gets
gosh,
it.
he was
And
so
just a little thing like
amazing.
that. A little thing like that makes an iconic moment just a little bit better. Just to
The
adds that
second he
little bit
dropped
extra.
the second he dropped the leg, Heenan goes, "I told you this for years, Kev." Everybody, something like that. It was like, "I told you this for years." It's
God
like,
rest in peace, Bobby
oh,
Heenan.
he is. He is. It was his vendetta against Hogan.
Mm-hmm.
And so another Hogan fact is that people don't know that Bobby Heenan used to manage Nick Bockwinkel in the AWA, and that was the one man that Hogan could not beat.
That's
And
Nick
Nick
Bockwinkel.
Bockwinkel, yeah, he could not beat Nick
The
Bockwinkel.
one guy that Hogan could not convince to, just like, well, Vern, I don't think I'm going to do that.
Yeah, he couldn't do
I
it.
don't think I'll be
There was
doing that, Vern.
he might have went over him in like a dusty finish or something like that, and
Mm-hmm.
but the title always stayed on Nick Bockwinkel. And then when Nick Bockwinkel had a chance to jump to the WWF, which he did in the 80s, and I was shocked because I was like, he was the AWA champion like 3 weeks ago. He's on
Well, I mean, and even
commentary.
still, yeah, I mean, his legacy in WWF obviously pales, and never really, got to that point on a cultural level either.
It was a different time. We were going into the
Yeah.
cartoon era of wrestling, and AWA was going bankrupt. I hate to say it, and this is not me bad mouthing the company because I liked a lot of the early stuff in the AWA. So,
Oh, well, Vern had his problems later in that run as far as booking and all that. I don't think that's really that disputed.
so many people, like I said, they didn't know that Hogan was the original IWGP champion, the original belt version, the very first champion. Went over Antonio Inoki in New Japan, Hulk Hogan.
Mm-hmm.
Now, when we draw that back, okay, he controversial, like lost the championship. Inoki's going to do what Inoki wants to do. He goes back to the States. AWA bounces right back, did Rocky, and then goes to WWF. People don't know that sometime in the late 80s, he went over to New Japan and he wrestled the Great Muta.
Mm-hmm.
And
There's some
so
fun matches to watch.
that is one of the most interesting matches to watch in your life because you're going to say that is not the same Hulk Hogan. This is not kick, punch, body slam, clothesline, leg drop, and call my ear. He actually wrestled, and you look at it and you said, okay, if you had this the whole time, do you know how much bigger you would have been?
I think my favorite Hulk Hogan move is the Hulk Hogan in Japan drop toe hold.
Oh dear
Because
Lord!
I don't think I ever saw him do a drop toe hold in any other match in this, like in the States anyway. Over here.
Did you ever see when he wrestled? I think it might have been Ric Flair in the 90s, and instead of doing the whole circle around figure four, he actually put the guys, I think it was Ric Flair, like put his feet into the four, then stepped in it slowly, stepped over, and then fell down. And my brother and I were watching that, and he and I have been watching since '84. We're just like, what? Now, with that being said, you could say good things or bad things about Hulk Hogan. He's wrestled everybody, and he has put over some legends. He has, under duress, put over Ric Flair. He has, on his way
Put
up.
over Billy Kidman for crying out loud.
Yes, yes, with a bash in the head. with a chair
Yes.
from Eric Bischoff.
Well, he's
But
not doing that clean.
Yeah. But that was, I mean, they were trying to make him into Stone Cold at that point. It was just like, no.
Yeah, Billy Kidman. Yeah, I loved him back then, but
It was just different. You know, we look at different
it's
times,
a weird
different
thing to
eras.
look back on now as an adult and go, Billy Kidman against Hogan. That's I seem to remember watching it when I was like 14, but this is a weird one.
It was just one of those deals, you know, like that's when Vince Russo came in and Eric Bischoff, of course, he had his lips firmly planted on Hogan's, and that's a posterior, by the way. And it just didn't make sense. I had no problem.
We're venturing into late '90s WCW territory. There's you could write a Bible with those stories, but you digress.
You and I could go all night on this kind of stuff, but the fact is, at one point, the train had left.
This is why the company's in the state that it's in, brother.
Yeah. And anybody who has creative control over their own contract ruins wrestling. There should be no such thing. And then you had the so-called Russo, is it a shoot? Is it not? I don't even care at this point. And then you have the whole situation with WCW going under. And I always thought the best way for the last episode is Hogan, Hall, and Nash go up and shake Vince McMahon's hands like they really were invaders and say, well, we didn't do it our way, but we got it done for you, boss. That could have been one of the most over stories ever. And it would have
look back on it now, it would have been better, than what they ended up doing. But yeah, that's I never thought of it that way.
You know, actually, my brother thought about that. Like, it was the best way they could do it instead of the way they did it at the end. But Hogan being the leader of the NWO, like the original NWO, there's only 1/3 left. It's crazy. It's crazy to think about that. And then when he turned heel, like you were talking about, like Bash at the Beach and everything else, I never thought I would see that. In fact, we had like little cheat boxes on our televisions. Okay, we had cheat boxes, and so we could kind of illegally, I mean, statute of limitations is up. We could get pay-per-view. But I had to work that day. I was a young kid. I was like, I don't know, 19 or something like that. And I worked my summer job, and I'm just working and working. And I got home, and my good friend, who we're going to dedicate a show to soon, Scott Blair, calls me. He goes, did you hear what happened? And I was like, no. He's like, Hogan turned heel. I didn't believe him. I did not believe him. And he's like, yeah. He's like, Hogan turned heel today. And so Nitro went from okay, because Raw was terrible at that time. You had all the gimmicks. So you just watched it and you had this more grittier product. But he was part of that. And if he didn't say yes, it was going to be Sting. But he said, yes, I'll do it. And it's
which,
like,
thank God, because I don't think that would have worked the same with Sting in that place. Not saying that Steve Gordon couldn't do it, but I'm not sure that it works, the way that they, really want it to work to make it as impactful as it was.
Nah, it was very impactful. It was everybody. It was water cooler talk. I hate to say it, something like that. Like,
I mean, you set up that next whatever year and a half build to Starrcade '97 that they royally screw up, but nonetheless,
83 weeks, 83 weeks, and Vince had never been spanked like that before, and he could not understand it. And that's what made it so beautiful, because growing up as an NWA to WCW fan, and then when Hogan got there, I was just depressed because I was like, you have talent like Vader and Ric Flair and Ron Simmons, and all these people have to go under for him. And I'm like, dude, you had your time. You have TV shows, and your movies suck. They did.
Hey, they mostly suck.
Okay. Well, we're going to talk about that. So this is what I want to say. So Hulk Hogan, I did own a Hulk Hogan T-shirt in 1984.
The classic Hulkster.
Oh, it was orange, yellow
Hulkamania. Sorry.
Yes, it was Hulkamania right across it, and I probably weighed about 80 pounds. So yeah, I was really filling that out for him. But it's the fact that if it wasn't for him, Vince McMahon wouldn't have had the vision or the superstar to create the next level.
Yeah, arguably no rock and wrestling connection, which is really what springboard, whatever.
The golden
the WWF
era.
Into
it was,
what it was.
Yeah, the rock and wrestling connection. was the biggest part of creating what was going to be the golden era. Cyndi Lauper's here. Ozzy Osbourne's here. Alice Cooper is here. People forget about that. Alice Cooper in WrestleMania, I think it was 3, was in Jake the Snake's corner. People forget about this stuff, but it was Hogan who did this. And I think actually the genius mind behind it was Jimmy Hart.
I'm sure he had a lot to do with that.
Well, they paired up with, what was his name? Rick Dillinger? And they did the wrestling albums.
Yeah.
I mean,
that's
it was
right.
And I know everybody who's listening is like saying, okay,
It's
you're
Derringer, who also just passed away a couple of months ago, if you remember.
Derringer? Yeah. Yeah. So
I didn't even think about that until just now, and it's like, well, that just not that long ago, you lose the guy that made the Real American, which, just saying, is got to be one of the best entrance themes out there.
And you're the only guy who can answer this. Who was it originally for?
I don't know if I know that one, actually. Yeah, the original song, the song was originally for? Not for Hogan?
Yeah. It was not for Hogan. He came out to Eye of the Tiger. He came out to Eye of the Tiger because they had all that Rocky, all that Rocky 3 momentum. This is really cool.
I knew that was the case, but I did not know they intended to use the Derringer song for somebody else.
It was the U.S. Express, Mike Rotunda and Barry Windham. It was their theme song. And then Barry left. They reformed the team with Dan Spivey, changed their theme, and gave it to Hulk Hogan. I'm a real American. Yeah.
I mean, it's pretty cool. Like, I haven't really sat down since he died to do this yet, but I have in the past, go back and watch some older matches. And again, go back to WrestleMania 3. He was one of the only guys that even had music, even at that point. There wasn't a lot of guys that were doing it. But Andre comes out with Heenan, and the music hits, and I mean, that's whatever Mean Gene said, that was 69 or 70 something thousand people, whatever. Absolutely
90,000, 90,000, I think they say. It was just like mind blowing, like how goofy it was. But in the end, what I want to say about Hulk Hogan is I was a kid. It was 1984, and I was really into wrestling because I met a friend named Heath Tittle. And to this day, I should probably sign off on this a lot. Heath, if you ever listen to this, you gave me this sickness. You can never take it away. We went to a book fair. We bought these books. I've said this on other shows. And there was one that was like an encyclopedia of wrestling, and I memorized the whole thing. And I would watch Territory Wrestling because in Cleveland we had that, and it was so awesome. But Hogan was everything. Hogan. You look up in the sky. Instead of the bat symbol, you see Hogan. That's what Vince McMahon did, but he knew how to make a national expansion, and he put it on the back, and a huge back of a bleach blonde guy with a receding hairline who was a mediocre wrestler at best, and that's what they did. Now, before we close out, before Hogan passed, he said a couple of interesting things. Would you like to touch on that, Sean?
I think we must. Just right before we do that, I get something good out, like you were saying.
Go ahead.
It goes without saying. I mean, we kind of joked on it earlier that you go off and list this guy and list this other guy and go off on tangents, and we could probably do this for 4 hours, or longer. But I think that it is an example showing just how big he is. I won't even say was, because I even think still to this day he's still a massive piece of pro wrestling, and you can't really, at the end of the day, talk about very much from the last 40 years or so in pro wrestling without it in some way being, if not connected, somewhat tertiarily related to Hulk Hogan. That's how huge he was, and even remains. Again, I just don't think there's really any denying that, despite some of the problematic things that have happened since his career ended. And we all know, and you look back on it now, and it's a little, sad. You don't want to imagine going through, your last real big public appearance like it was at the the first Netflix showing of Raw, and he got booed out of the building. The MAGA stuff, obviously the racial stuff that was involved with the Bubba the Love Sponge. If you want to get really political,
Nah, we don't do politics on the show.
No, but just mentioning to the taking down Gawker, with Peter Thiel and all of that, the sex tape case. to even stuff that was in his career. I mean, Jesse Ventura talks a lot about how Hogan really scuffled their attempt to unionize the wrestlers, which you could argue would have a negative or a positive impact on the industry as a whole. Obviously, Hogan stood to gain less by that happening, and he used his power and influence to rat Ventura out and squash that, and he'd cut the legs off of a lot of other guys who may or again may not have been deserving to kind of take that that torch to the next level, but that's what happened. And I just, again, it comes back to him being such an iconic figure in this industry that even so many negative things can be said about his character, not so much the Hogan character, but behind the scenes, the politicker, the guy, looking out for himself more so than some of his, the stuff with Randy Savage. It's a very complicated person, Terry Bollea, but at the end of the day, he is still a person. I don't love the guy. I don't think he's an evil person. That's a pretty, far stretch. Definitely had some pretty bad opinions on a lot of things, but that's humans. And I feel, condolences to his family and his friends, people that knew him, loved him. I'm sure they're hurting right now. And, as a whole industry, as pro wrestling, we've just lost the biggest icon that probably will ever exist. I don't know if, who knows, 60 years from now, I don't know if anybody can really get to that level at this point again.
Probably not, to be honest with you. I mean, Stone Cold and The Rock were the two closest, and they did what they did, and they sold out a lot of things. But as far as Hogan went, I mean,
it's just a different level. It's not a knock on them.
It really is.
It's the Yankees in baseball, winning, 27, World Series, so many more than even the next, best team. It's just this industry has one massive icon that it can never really get out of the shadow of, and that's definitely Hulk Hogan. Say what you will about Vince McMahon and things going forward, I still think he's kind of up there too, but it's not quite the same with him.
Well, with that, I just want to say that my movie recommendation of the night.
You've been waiting on this part.
Oh, yes. Only for one scene. No holds barred. One, forgive me for telling you to watch that movie.
Oh, I've seen it. I love it.
Well, it is, you know what the scene is. Doongies.
What's that smell?
That's what it all comes down to is, what's that smell? Doongies. That's the only Hogan movie you should ever watch, because anything else I don't like, but go ahead.
Point of order. My pick is and will always be Suburban Commando. I'll take it to my grave. I love that movie front to back. It's hilarious. It's hilariously bad. Christopher Lloyd and Shelley Duvall are also in the movie. And The Undertaker, a young Mark Calloway,
he is.
Proto-Undertaker.
He is,
who has a great scene where he finally speaks and he says to Shep Ramsey, Hogan's character, "You're a dead man, Ramsey," but he has the voice of a 4-year-old.
You're a dead man, Ramsey.
No wonder you guys never talk.
Oh, dear.
Which is always a nice visual. You go back and YouTube that when we get done with this.
He did have a young voice. He did have a young voice.
No. He probably did, but I mean, they actually dubbed a 4-year-old saying, "You're a dead man, Ramsey," over the Undertaker, miming it on screen.
Who has the deepest voice? Okay. All right.
And then, of course, Christopher Lloyd shouting that he was frozen today. I was frozen today. I love that movie.
Even if Christopher Lloyd does something bad, you can't really fault him because he's Christopher Lloyd, because whatever he does is good. Like Back to the Future, it's just iconic.
Yeah, he played almost like a very scary hobo who might be trying to abduct Dennis and Dennis the Menace, but we all still love Christopher Lloyd, of course.
And one last fact for you, which you're going to know this because people, I cannot beat Sean at trivia.
You already struck out on that once earlier in this program.
I always
didn't
do
know the
that.
answer.
But so, what is Shelley Duvall known for as far as cinema goes?
As far as cinema, well, I mean, good lord, she was in The Shining, Popeye, gotta love that.
What
Lord,
did she make famous? Famous.
what should she make famous? Famous?
Mm-hmm.
Talk about a particular line.
A particular scene.
You
I've
talking
got
about
your
from The Shining?
Yes.
Well, I mean, she bashed Jack Nicholson over the head with a bat. That was pretty good.
Okay.
Reading the letters, which that we could get started on a whole. We'll start a movies podcast sometime soon. Which Shining's a great one, and Shelley Duvall deserved a ton of credit for putting up with. Anyway,
So it's in
great
The
film.
Shining. The scene with the bat. She had the most scenes and takes ever in history at the point that The Shining was made. It was like 180 or something like that, because Stanley Kubrick kept saying it doesn't look realistic. When she was swinging at him, he just kept saying, like, stop, take again, take again, take again. It doesn't look real.
Like the old it's like the old Phil Spector thing where he would get the wrecking crew in there in the recording studio and just have them play the same song over and over and over and over again until it felt like their arms were going to fall off. That's basically what Kubrick did to Shelley Duvall, and for pretty much most of that movie, poor woman. They always feel bad for Shelley Duvall. My favorite was always that old TV movie. What was it? The Mother Goose. It had all the Howie Mandels and Paul Simon, Gene Stapleton, all those guys. That's a good one.
Mother Goose Presents?
Something like that.
Yeah.
She had her own. She had her own show. Was it Shelley Duvall's?
It was on HBO. Yeah, it was on
Fairy Tale
HBO.
Cinema or
Fairy Tale Theater. It was Fairy Tale Theater. I got you.
Yeah.
Okay. Last thing, a song or a food that you want to recommend?
Well, on this occasion of all occasions, there can only be two. We already talked about Rick Derringer, so you have to go with maybe the coolest entrance music just because the song is so cool, but Jimi Hendrix for the NWO Hogan music, not the NWO B Team music that we all know and love.
Yeah.
Voodoo Child.
Voodoo Child.
And of course, the food of the day is Pasta Mania, brother.
That's a pretty awesome, amazing, good put together. Okay, so I'm going to go with my song is probably going to be Space Hog. In the meantime, it's a song from the past, and that's when like the Hogan thing was happening, and I was happy to watch like the NWO actually doing something, and I was actually interested in watching Hogan instead of like say your prayers, eat your vitamins. I've done that. I'm still 145 pounds.
You're the wrong vitamins.
Hey, I'm just being honest with you, okay?
You have to get those Flintstones vitamins, man. Come on.
But as you can admit, I look good for 50. And, as far as food goes, I've been thinking about like a lot of different recipes lately, and I'm thinking about like a different version of a sloppy Joe because it's going to be tailgating season soon. It's called a sloppy Jose. And so you ground your meat and you make all your sauce, but you boil your sauce, and cherry tomatoes and everything else, and you ground it up. But you throw in 2 shots of tequila, which I'm not a big fan of, but it works in this recipe. And then you use a lot of Mexican spices and a pinch of mole. And I'm going to tell you what, having a sloppy Jose is a really good sandwich. It's a really, really good sandwich. So
it sounds all right. It needs a better name. I'm not going to lie.
That's just what I discovered it as, like YouTube. You know me as far as
I'm not putting sloppy Jose in YouTube. Or on any search engine. I'm sorry, I'm not going to do it.
It's
you
really
you ain't getting me with that one, brother.
Okay. As far as that, at 144 Captain on X, that's how you could reach me, Sean.
Nobody can reach me. Don't try.
God, I love you, but I can reach you. So, aside from that, Jimmy, rock it out.